I hadn't heard that before. Today's speaker is live on Zoom. Our guest speaker today is Rachel Jamieson, Secretary of the Springfield, Missouri PFLAG chapter. She will speak with us about white supremacy and anti-racism in today's world. Rachel is a theater professional and educator, as well as an activist and advocate for anti-racism, decolonization, intersectionality, and social justice in Southwest Missouri. She holds an MFA in actor training and coaching from the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, where her thesis was the intersectional feminism in directing pedagogy. She also holds an MA in educational theater in colleges and communities from New York University, where her culminating event was studying at the Center for the Theater of the Oppressed in Brazil. Rachel is currently an instructor in the theater and dance department of Missouri State University. Please welcome Rachel Jamieson. You might be muted.
Thank you, Jeff, for that introduction and a warm welcome this morning. And thank you all, Ethical Society Mid-Rivers, for having me here this morning. I'm going to just dive in right away with sharing my screen because I even have my introduction and my introductory remarks on the PowerPoint that I'm going to share, just in the interest of transparency. So I'm going to go ahead and share that screen right away. So we're going to talk today about anti-racism and white supremacy in terms of social justice literacy. So I'm Rachel Jamieson. My pronouns are she, hers. We attempted to enable closed captioning this morning whenever there's not an ASL interpreter available in order for us to have accessibility for those with low or no hearing. We try to turn on the closed captioning at PFLAG in Springfield. But because we have someone else who is the expert in that technology, I wasn't able to help out well enough to have that available today. But I just wanted to let you know that that was something that I was hoping to access, and hopefully it's just something that we can think about for the future. And I'm going to give a visual description of myself for those with low or no vision. So I'm a middle-aged white woman with long brown hair and glasses. And behind me, I have my bedroom motif in red and black, and also a brown wall behind me. I'm gonna see what's in the chat. Oh, thank you, Sarah. Yes, I'm glad you're already using the chat feature because we're going to talk about that, as you can see on the screen. We're going to prepare ourselves for mindfulness today by going ahead and just stretching, relaxing, focusing on our breathing, massaging, right? So wherever you need to do that, I invite you to join me in that as I introduce myself and give you a little context. So I was invited here today by Jill All, and Jill invited me after I met her at a PFLAG Central Region meeting. And feel free to massage your jaw, your neck, your shoulders, take some deep breaths with me as we prepare today. And the context of my presentation style is that I'm a teacher and I am a theater professional. And so activity and interaction are my styles. And I have done a lot of work with Theater of the Oppressed, as Jeff introduced me in my bio. And with Theater of the Oppressed, there's a lot of interaction with the audience. And it's because theater is political and it's a rehearsal for life. And so Feel free to keep massaging your temples, the back of your neck, and breathe as we continue. We do activities to get the audience relaxed, and we get the audience involved. And so I'm going to go ahead and do a Theater of the Oppressed activity that Augusto Boal, who created Theater of the Oppressed, he invented a lot of these games, and we're just going to do an easy one that you can do on your own at home. So take one more deep, deep breath in through your nose, out through your mouth. And go ahead and just make a circle with your right hand. Make it several times so you can get the feel of it. If you've done it 3 times, do it a few more times. That's the easy part, right? Making a circle with our right hands, if we're able, right? So thinking about ability, are you able this morning? Maybe not. Let's try with our left hand, making a cross. Again, this might seem easy for some of us, maybe not so much for others. Let's be mindful of that as we continue. And let's go ahead now and try to do them both at the same time. So doing a circle with your right hand and a cross with your left hand at the same time. I'm seeing some laughing emojis. Yeah, it's not easy, right? That's just an activity to get us involved and to get us thinking a little bit about accessibility. What's easy for some people isn't as much for others. And also to get us laughing a little bit and to enjoy each other. And let's start by practicing using the chat feature. I guess that some of you already are, and maybe all of you are already. If you know how to use it, that's great. But if not, you can go into the chat feature. The icon that says chat, just click on it, and then you can start typing in the bottom. When you hit enter, then your remarks will be shared with everyone. So please start by introducing yourself with your pronouns. And anything else you might want to say. If you wanted to say good morning, of course, all those things are welcome. There's no rules here. Thank you for participating and sharing. It's good to see so many people participating this morning. We already had Sarah participate at the beginning, then we have Angie and Jessica, Lee, Eric, Michael, Shayna, Bill All, Mike Daly, Jill, Jeff, Bill Otto, Danielle, that's my middle name. Tom, good morning. Thank you for participating. We're going to play a quick game called This or That. So now you can go ahead and throw in the chat what your preferences are. It's on a binary. So if you don't fit on the binary, feel free to share in some other way. So you can use the chat, or you can share your comments aloud if you want to unmute and share that way. So this or that, coffee or tea? Are you a coffee person or a tea person? So again, if you don't fit on the binary, that's okay. Some people are coffee, diet dew, right? Yes, we get our caffeine in other ways sometimes too. Yes, and there's a lot of big capital letter coffees. That's me too. And let's do comedy or drama. What's your preference, or are you somewhere in between? Comedy or drama? Lots of comedy. Oh, decaf because of ulcers. I understand. I have chronic acid reflux. And so I have to be careful with how much caffeine I consume too. Yep. Oh, and horror. Woo! And indie. Yeah, I can relate to that, certainly. Yes. Lots of comedy. Yeah, we all like to laugh. Sometimes we need a little drama to make sense of the world, and sometimes we need a little comedy to help us relax and enjoy ourselves. All right. And finally this morning, are you someone who is interested in sports or in entertainment? Sports, or I should say theater / film / TV, actually, because sports are entertainment too for some people. And again, if you don't fall in the binary, that's okay. Share a little more. Musicals, dance, all right. Film, TV, theater, entertainment, Broadway, gaming, yeah. And some people like both, yeah. I grew up a big baseball fan, even though I'm much more into theater as a professional. I still enjoy my baseball, so I'm with you on that. Great. All right, so let's all share our thoughts on the introduction. So you've got the introduction agenda in front of you. What were your thoughts? Why do you think it was done this way? What could be preparing you for a conversation about anti-racism and white supremacy by doing an introduction like this one? Any thoughts or welcome? You're thinking about it and sharing. I'm just in subject matter. I've been learning a lot about it over the years, especially lately, as probably many of you have as well, right? To be an anti-racist and white fragility were number one.
Let's give Rachel a second to join back in. That was really good.
Certainly different than our usual introductions.
Yes.
Was she
It's
cutting
fun.
it out at the end?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know if it was my local Wi-Fi.
I apologize. You know, we just a few weeks ago got new internet, and it's supposed to be better and faster, and I've never gotten kicked off of a meeting before. Well, that's not true, but it's been a very long time since I have, and not since we got the new Wi-Fi, so that was unexpected. I apologize for that, and hopefully it won't happen again.
That's okay, Rachel. We're all here waiting. We love where you're.
Well, hopefully you've been sharing your thoughts. Although once I get kicked out and back in, I don't know if I can see them. Oh, no, I can. Great. Yes. Okay. So I can see what everyone wrote. Excellent. So to show it's okay to be in the middle or other than two options. Yeah, Sarah, absolutely. We don't have to fall on a binary. We're all complex individuals, right? And contemplating diversity of ideas, diversity of thoughts, opinions, absolutely. Seeing differences and similarities in all of us, yes. Yes, to see how we're similar or different and that they're both valid and to be celebrated. Different than our usual, good, yes. So it's interactive is different than usual. Focus on those who can't hear or see, right? We don't always know when that's needed, because it might even be needed for people who usually have those abilities. And Yes, my screen share is stopped. I'll come back to it. Sorry. Just wanted to read these messages. Bringing awareness to the privilege of our able bodies. Yeah, great. I have never been a part of an ethical society before. And once I started hearing about your group from Jill and from reading about your group, I was like, this is the group for me. This is where I fit right in. So it's so exciting to hear these ideas from all of you. Yes, yes, I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. I'm going to go ahead and go back to screen sharing now. And before I do, actually, I'm going to pull up my notes briefly, because what I'm realizing is that, again, I'm not the most tech savvy individual in the room. So my notes weren't necessarily included here today on the bottom of the screen that I thought they were going to be. So I'm just going to pull those up. Okay, and then I can easily go back and forth and read them when I need to. Thank you for being patient with me this morning. All right, so back to the screen share. Okay, so one thing that I am learning in some of my workshops and books I'm reading is that it's always good to have community guidelines, and your group might already have some, so feel free to share them in the chat if you do. But I'm just going to share some of the ones that I've learned in various workshops, and also from, especially from the book Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds by Adrienne Marie Brown. So the first one is self-care and community care. So feel free to take care of yourself throughout this process, as well as taking care of the community, which means turn your camera off if you need to, but if you can participate, please leave it on. And if you are not talking at the moment, then please leave your sound off, but you're encouraged to turn it on if you ever want to chime in. Or you can do that through the chat if that's easier or more accessible for you. And also, if you need to step away at any moment, you're encouraged to do that as well. To take care of yourself and the community. Make space and take space. You may have heard the phrase step up, step back, meaning knowing when to speak and when to not speak, or when to stop speaking, right? And yet that is something that I've learned recently is an ableist phrase, step up and step back. So it's better to say make space and take space, right? How much space are you taking up? How much space are you making for others? Asking yourself, why am I talking, right? Because we're going to be talking some more later. Listening to understand rather than to respond. Engaging in tension, but avoiding drama. Knowing that ambiguity, complexity, and paradox are possibilities. And then engaging in confidentiality, taking the lessons, but leaving the details. Are there any that you would like to share? I don't know if your group already has community guidelines, or if you have any that you would like to add to this list from just the top of your head. Feel free to share them if you do in the chat or aloud. Right. Awesome guidelines. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, these are my favorites that I've found over the years. Seeing the worth of all people. Thank you, Kimberly. That is a really good one to add. Okay, so your group doesn't have guidelines at the moment, but maybe that's something you might want to think about in the future. And something that's really interesting that I've also learned is that they can change. They're fluid. Whatever is needed for that group in that moment is the guidelines that can be used. In group discussions where you're already mindful of take space and leave space. That's great. Thank you, Jill. All right, so I'm not surprised to hear that about your group. I can already tell that you're very mindful. Let's move on. All right, so you may or may not be familiar with land acknowledgements, but we're gonna go ahead and talk about, I'm gonna read a land acknowledgement for today. And so I'm gonna have to take us away. I'm gonna have to just stop the screen share just for a moment so I can access that, because again, my notes I thought would be showing here at the bottom, but they're not. So I'm just gonna stop that briefly, read the land acknowledgement, and then we'll come back to the screen share. Escaping here. There we go. Okay. We begin today with a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement, like a protest or a vigil, is a disruption and a reminder that we must understand our colonial, global, national, state, and local history. We start by acknowledging this history of colonialism to remind us that to understand the injustices of today, we must recognize their connection to the injustices of the past. And that last quote, to remind us that to understand the injustices of today, we must recognize their connection to injustices of the past, is from Özlem Sensoy and Robin DiAngelo from Is Everyone Really Equal? I acknowledge that I am coming to you today from the stolen ancestral land of the Sioux, Osage, and Kickapoo people who were forcibly displaced by local colonizers and the national government. I also acknowledge that a section of the Trail of Tears runs through my city, now known as Springfield, Missouri, where thousands of Cherokee people were forcibly migrated across the country from their unceded territories by the US government. I invite you to use this link that I'm going to drop in the chat to share your own land acknowledgement. So I'm going to drop that here. Oh, your American Ethical Union wrote one. Okay, great. Environmental justice. Yes, we're about to get into that as well. Great. We are all on the same page still. It is important to further acknowledge that our gathering is being shared digitally and that we quote, this is a quote from Adrienne Wong from the Spider Web Show, "We should consider the legacies of colonization embedded within these technologies and we use every day, which are not available in many indigenous communities across the US and contribute to changing climates that disproportionately affect indigenous peoples worldwide." And thank you for, I'm seeing people sharing. I'm gonna acknowledge those in a moment, but let me just wrap up by saying, while mere acknowledgements are far from enough, they invite us and inspire a shared responsibility to uplift the indigenous peoples of the past and present, to consider our roles in justice and equity, and to take action in anti-racism, decolonization, and allyship. So thank you for acknowledging that with me. And feel free to go on and click on this link right now if you're able to do that right now, and then you can share an acknowledgement. And you can just, if you haven't done that before, what I learned the first time I did this, I just said, I acknowledge. And then I was luckily educated that saying I acknowledge is great, but you want to go a little step further and acknowledge the names of the peoples whose land you are sitting on. So, excuse me, if you want to go ahead and find that land right now, you can, and then you can go ahead and acknowledge that in the chat. And I'm going to continue and turn the screen back on while you're doing that. All right, can you see the screen share now?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Jeff. All right. Yes, thank you for participating, everyone. Wonderful, thank you, Tom and Jill. Yeah, even though you're all normally in the same area, you might be in different areas right now since we're Zooming in together. So, all of the aspects of what a land acknowledgement is, the personal land acknowledgement that I did and having you participate, as well as the digital land acknowledgement, and why we do land acknowledgements was all addressed. If you want to learn a little more about how to do one, this is a link that I can share with all of you in the chat. Oh, no, I'm going to have to do that afterward, which is fine because it's also on my last page, which is the work cited. I'm not going to try and go back because, again, I'm not as tech savvy as I should be. So let's just move on. Ibram X. Kendi, who you may be familiar with. So again, feel free to chime in with your ideas if you're familiar and your thoughts and connections and concerns. So he's the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. And what he shares with us is that a racist is one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction, or expressing a racist idea. An anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. Something to notice, a few things to notice. It does not include the phrase not racist. So many of us, what Ibram X. Kendi says is we say, I'm not racist, right? But that's because we're seeing ourselves as a state of being, but it's actually an active definition. Are you engaging in racism or anti-racism from moment to moment? So he addresses this by talking about the concept of colorblindness as well. So I'll read that, a little section out of that for you. The common idea of claiming colorblindness is akin to the notion of being not racist. As with the not racist, the colorblind individual, by ostensibly failing to see race, fails to see racism and falls into racist passivity. The language of colorblindness, like the language of not racist, is a mask to hide racism. So feel free, again, to share your thoughts, ideas, questions, concerns. Again, we are learning together. So we have time at the end for questions, but we can also ask them as we're going along. So feel free to drop any in the chat or unmute if you need to. And white supremacy, according to Aslam Sensoy and Robin DiAngelo, who are the authors of Is Everyone Really Equal? An Introduction to Key Concepts in Social Justice Education. White supremacy is the academic term used to capture the all-encompassing dimensions of white privilege dominance, and assumed superiority in mainstream society. These dimensions include ideological, institutional, social, cultural, historical, political, and interpersonal. So again, there's some things to notice here. It's not limited to what we normally think of as white supremacy, which is someone who engages in white nationalism, or groups who are engaging in extreme groups like the Ku Klux Klan. It's including all-encompassing dimensions. So that shows us that it is everywhere. So you can probably think of places where we have white supremacy and ask ourselves why. So for example, we are enculturated into understanding white supremacy through, I'll go back to entertainment, right? TV, film, theater, because that's where my line of work is. Something I had to reckon with is I can still love the shows that I loved before that maybe have all white casts or engage in white supremacy, but I have to recognize it and I have to be able to identify how it's impacting me and my view on the world. So for example, I love the Lord of the Rings movies. You might too, but when we look at them critically in terms of race and racialized people, how many white people are in the movie? How many people of color are in the movie? And how many of them are portrayed in one light versus another light, right? So thinking about those things and then how those impact us culturally when we're constantly consuming that kind of information. So I'm seeing some stuff in the chat that I want to address. So unfortunately, lots of people think that white supremacy is white nationalism, so they push back against that term. Exactly. How do we dispel that notion? Great question, Jill. By talking about it and by identifying it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that soon, a little bit more. So thank you for asking that question. Mike, lack of universal healthcare and education disparities is another place where we see white supremacy and racism, systemic racism. Yes, thank you, Mike. So before we answer that question, Jill, let's go ahead and look at privilege, which again, in the same book, the same authors address privilege as rights, advantages, and protections enjoyed by some at the expense of and beyond the rights, advantages, and protections available to others. So that's like what you were talking about, Mike. So noticing that when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. And I wanted to, I've heard that several times and I wanted to quote the proper person for that, but I was not able to find to attribute that quote to anyone. So if you know, please share it in the chat. I would be grateful. So this is why you may have heard the term white fragility, when people feel like they're feeling a little bit like this lack of, when our privilege is challenged through equity, we often can react with fragility, and just being mindful of that again to help us to know that racism is not necessarily an offensive term, and we're just happen to say something racist, and we can engage with that, and it can actually be something that we don't have to feel fragile about. We don't have to react defensively. Microaggressions are when we do react offensively, right, in some way, or we do something or don't do something. Everyday slights and insults that minoritized people endure and that most people of the dominant group don't notice or take seriously. Again, feel free to add your thoughts or questions or concerns as we go along. We also have implicit biases. And according to Mahzarin Banaji and Anthony Greenwald, the authors of Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People. Implicit bias is a blind spot that contains a large set of biases and keeps them hidden, capable of guiding our behavior without our being aware of their role. They are bits of knowledge about social groups stored in our brains, which we encounter in our cultural environments, like we just talked about with entertainment. These biases can influence our behavior toward members of particular social groups, but we remain oblivious to their influence. So again, we're going to notice it is possible to be racist, even when we think of ourselves as not racist. And we are products of enculturation and our limited perspectives. Any thoughts, questions, or concerns before we move on? Feel free to speak aloud too. You don't have to write them in the chat, but whichever you're more comfortable with, or you don't have to. We can move on, and we can save questions for the end too, if that's better for everyone. There's a comment. I asked Google to play songs about strong women, and Google played "The Woman in Me Needs the Man in You." Amazing how when we search things in Google, how, yeah, those microaggressions can pop up, Angie, absolutely. Yeah, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Jessica, the concept of being racist, even when we think we aren't, is something I'm trying to work on. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your authentic and vulnerable comment, Jessica, because that's something that we all are working on, I think, right? I know that I'm constantly working on it, because even as educated as I try to be about it, I still have those blind spots because of my lived experience. It sneaks in, absolutely, yeah, yeah. Bill, I see racism as a spectrum as opposed to a binary, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's all encompassing, right? Yeah, like was said before. And intersectionality. So according to law professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term, intersectionality is a lens, a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other. We tend to talk about race inequality as separate from inequality based on gender, class, sexuality, or immigrant status. What's often missing is how some people are subject to all of these, and the experience is not just the sum of its parts. Intersections of oppression include racism, xenophobia, sexism, ableism, classism, homophobia, transphobia. If you can think of any others, feel free to add them in the chat or aloud. Or any thoughts or questions about intersectionality in general. Ageism, yes. Thank you for including that, Kimberly. Absolutely. Thank you. Whatever anti-woman is called. Yeah. Sexism is part of that, or misogyny too, right? Yeah. Thank you both for sharing those, Javon and Kimberly. Oh, there's another one. I just closed it. And weight, yes, body image, absolutely, yes. Neurodiversity phobia, thank you, yes. Yeah. I include that in ableism, but I'm glad that you identified that because that's an important aspect of ableism that we need to identify. Thank you, Mike. And Angie says yes, yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you for bringing those to our attention. So a lot of this language tends to be seen as radical, right? Because people often look at, they want to use easier words like inclusion, and those are great words to use, right? because if we're being inclusive, we're welcoming to everyone with diverse ideas and diverse backgrounds and diverse racialized groups, et cetera, all of the intersections we just looked at. Let me just see what's in the chat here. Labeling people for how they look, example, how many tattoos they have. Yes, absolutely. Like a lot of folks, I was raised in a racist household and I am never really sure how far from that I have gone, nor do I understand how I got away from this. Bill Otto, thank you for sharing that, because yeah, I appreciate your authenticity and your vulnerability in sharing that, because again, I think some of us can relate to that. I was raised in a very conservative household and didn't think I was raised in a racist household, but looking back on it, I can see aspects of racism that were instilled in me, and I have to constantly work to undo that too. So again, yeah, it's hard to know when we're engaging with it or when we're engaging in anti-racism, but that's why I'm constantly educating. So thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of us can relate.
So coming back to radical, using this language,
identifying things as racist when we don't want to offend people, right? Because racist can really make people defensive or feel fragile. Or calling out white supremacy when we see it can be, again, a really difficult thing to do, and it might seem radical. And so I just wanted to address that by sharing a quote from political activist, academic, and author Angela Davis. She says, radical simply means grasping things at the root, getting to the solutions, right? Getting to the heart of the matter, not just trying to glaze over the top just to make people feel comfortable, right? You do need to know your audience, of course, right? In order to know how to approach these things, but it helps if we can really get to the heart of things, grasp things at the root to make change, so that we can identify the problem, reduce the stigma of terms like racism or white supremacy. And then there's the potential for liberation and systemic transformation. Let's look at some of these comments here. Thank you for participating. Again, some more comments about living in openly racist households.
like poor people just need Jesus and
or to work harder, right? Interesting root word. Yes, radical, rooting things out. That idea of meritocracy, where if we just work hard, then we can get to the American dream. Is that what you're addressing, Mike?
the bootstrap mentality. Yep. Shayna, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say some of it is that, and to also the idea that basically, well, next life is the one that really matters, so they shouldn't complain about being poor in this life.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah.
Because Jesus plus nothing equals everything. That is what you're taught to say about can't complain because you have Jesus. So why are you complaining? I relate, Mike.
Yeah. I can relate to that too, growing up in a conservative Christian household. Yeah. Thank you both for sharing that. Yeah.
So this is the last slide. And this is from Story-Based Strategy, which is an educational website. And this is something called the fourth box.
So you may have seen this little meme on social media where we look at the first picture. Can you see my cursor? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. So equality looks like giving everyone the same thing, which supposedly makes them equal, but look at the difficulty people have when they are treated equally sometimes. equity allows for more accessibility for people who need it.
And yet liberation,
Liberation breaks down the wall itself.
right? So that everyone is free, and yet what the fourth box on the story-based strategy
Website says is that there's also this box for transformation. And how do we, especially when we have privilege, how can we do our part as allies to participate in that transformation? So that's the question I want to just leave you with today. And this is a question that we can talk about, although I think we're at time. If there's any final thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, I see there's something in the chat here, but let me just open that up and then we can address it and wrap up. So, oh, there's Jessica.
I can say it out loud. I put it in there because I thought I'd have to leave before QA. So sorry to make it long. It was just a reflection on what I'd said earlier, or what I commented earlier about constantly having to readjust my views and make sure that I am not giving into that racism that seems to still be there at times. So there was an event I'm in a Facebook group for just ladies. And there was an event that one of the ladies had posted about just a get together for Black lesbians. And I reacted negatively to that, and just was very frustrated by this, because I thought this would be a really enjoyable group. She sold it great. It would be so fun to be a part of, and I can't. I'm excluded. And so it took me a moment, and then it hit me, a little longer than a moment, but then it hit me, how dare I? Because you know what, this is a safe space that they've created for themselves. This is they have to deal with shit outside of that all the time, and this is their safe space. So once I readjusted my thought process about this, I went in, commented, and showed support for the group that they're doing this, because I was just upset at myself that my initial reaction to that was negative. And I see things like that every once in a while, and I always readjust afterwards, but I hate that initial reaction that I have. That was it.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you for sharing that vulnerable comment and place that you were at. And again, I think a lot of us can relate. Again, it comes back to that quote, right? Sometimes equity feels like oppression to those of us who have privilege. And yet you recognized it and you allowed yourself to see it differently. And that's the best we can do, right? In those moments. And so, yeah, it's important to recognize those feelings and to practice mindfulness and try to see it another way and look at the other point of view and let them go. Thank you so much for that. That's really helpful for a lot of us, I think, today.
Any other questions for Rachel?
Here's the works cited page.
I had like kind of a similar experience as Jessica did. I'm a big makeup buff, and I was looking through like the new arrivals on one of the makeup sites I go to, and there was some new concealer, and I was looking, and I was, oh, all the shade ranges are for people who have medium to darker skin, which is very unusual. And I was a little disappointed, and then I went down to read the reviews just to see what people said about it. I mean, I knew right away I wasn't gonna be able to wear it. I'm like one shade away from a sheet of paper, basically. But I was just curious, and somebody had made a comment saying how they felt like it was unfair that there weren't any lighter shades. And then unfortunately, it sort of devolved, because I am assuming somebody who did have medium to darker skin was like, okay, Karen, sorry, not everything is for you. And I kind of hated that on both levels, because it's like, there are 1,000 other companies that you can get your concealer from. But on the other side, the other person could have just been like, this is just me, we're trying to be, gain a little foothold in the makeup world, which has, until like, I want to say the last 5 years, has been very, very, maybe there's 2 shades on the end of the dark spectrum. Now, if you don't come out with like a full 45 to 50 shades, which includes probably 10 at the end, you're going to get yelled at. So I just felt a little disappointed for both of those people for the way in which they kind of went about it. Because my initial thought was, yeah, I'm a little disappointed, but there are thousands of others out there. So.
Sounds like some people need to read that White Fragility book, right? To recognize when they're being defensive and they don't need to be, that they can check themselves in the way that you did and saying, you know, I can just shop somewhere else, right? Yeah, instead of getting angry about it. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Danielle. Looks like there's a little bit in the chat here. Oh, yeah, Shayna's a cosmetologist, so you can relate. And it's just recently until now that it's been hard to match shades for people of color. Wow, systemic racism is everywhere, right? Keyboard warriors always disappoint. Thank you, Tom.
That's a fantastic presentation. Thank you, Rachel.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for participating and helping to add to the richness of the conversation.
Yeah, there's some unique ways of looking at that. We often, you know, have topics similar to this, but there are a lot of new ways to view it.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay, I'm glad to be of help.
Somebody trying to chime in? I heard something.
Yeah, it's definitely a deeper perspective on diversity and inclusion than we usually get from just even resources in society, and definitely like from our companies and things like that. So
Great.
Okay, thanks again. And we do a coming up section here. That I have a little bit on globally. Climate finance tops the agenda for the G7 meetings this week. That's a welcome change. Our hearts go out to India, the world's largest democracy, as it struggles through its record-breaking COVID outbreak. Coming up at ESMR, the Mother's Day program will include watching an edited episode from the Godless Moms podcast that focuses on situations where children of atheist and agnostic parents adopt religious dogma. The next Sunday, the American Ethical Union will present a national event for all, presented by the Youth of Ethical Societies, aka YES. Come hear from the teens themselves how they planned YES, how YES usually operates, and how it operated so far in 2021. The platform will be followed by the monthly colloquy. May 23 will be the living ethics discussion, and once again, we'll be able to do that in person outdoors. We can gather and talk about the challenges and triumphs we face as we try to live more ethical lives. That'll be at Brommelsick Park, which is technically Defiance, but it's not nearly that far in my mind. It's pretty close here, Pavilion number 3. If you're going to join us that day, youth in need donations are welcome, towels and disinfectant wipes. That's a youth shelter, Rachel. And Maddie Wilson will be collecting all plastic and metal bottle caps to donate to the Foundry Arts Center summer camp. Any connection basket items that anybody wants to announce themselves?
I just have one new addition. The Sikh families are getting together on May 16th to go to Indian Camp Creek or Indian Creek Camp. I forget which way it is, to tromp through the creek and do some fishing. More details to come.
Excellent. I can't get to the chat at the moment, but one of our members is going to their family today to meet with their mom. They were banished 2 years ago by their dad or stepdad, and now they'll be they're delighted to go do that today. So we'll be thinking about them. Hopefully they have a good experience there. I want to leave you with a little reflection today. What if we attacked the inequalities mentioned today with the same tenacity applied to attaining the COVID vaccine? Wouldn't that be something? Stay safe and remember to reach out if you have any needs, and have a great week. Thanks again, Rachel.